I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, here with Charlotte Brändström, the director of the third episode of FX's Shogun. And Charlotte, before we even really talk about the specifics of this, this is such a monumental episode, and there's so many things happening, and it moves the drama forward so much. So my first question is, when you look at this script for this episode, what's the first thing that comes into your mind?
Well, I first obviously I knew the books, so I had asked at the beginning, Justin to send me all the scripts so I would know where my episode fit in. So I read all 10 scripts, and I hadn't read the book for like 20 years, so that was actually an incredible surprise because it was completely gripping. It was like reading the book all over again. So I knew this was going to be something really, really good because they're just two great writers involved, Justin and Rachel. So when I came in, I obviously I look into what's been done before, but then, each episode has its own life. You have to create a new life for everything and I always look hard to get emotionally engaged with the characters. That's the first thing I look at. So I look at perspective, at point of view, and at what's the most important thing in each scene, and what it's going to grip us, and what's the stakes here. So I always start from the small and I go big. So as you might notice, I actually start with inserts and close shots before establishing the geographical space, because I find that helps us to get involved in the characters more. And then it was so big. So, then I knew it was going to go crazy in the end anyway.
Well, and it was interesting because this show, the show as a whole, is big and grand, and yet I feel like one of the hallmarks of the show is the fact that it is still an intimate drama. It is an intimate story that the grandiosity never overshadows the drama. And so I think it's interesting that you start small. Was there a particular scene in this episode where you knew exactly how you want? Was there a small moment in this episode that you hooked onto first?
They were obviously, there's obviously the beginning when he's supposed to write his testament, Yabushigi, and then it's also when Fuji, gets the urn back with her son and her husband, and that was also a very strong moment that starts small and then it sort of ends small too. It's all about drama because it ends on her moment of decision when she looks up, almost right into the camera at the end of the scene, and you know that she's going to keep going. She has to keep going. So it was really about making. I think that the difference between episode 3 and the beginning maybe was that I started to shoot more close-ups, tighter shots, because it became more dramatic. It was easier, obviously, because you've already established the world and everything, so you get into the characters first. And then I also knew that the second part of my episode was going to be this big battle in the woods and the ships racing against each other, and there was also all this big stuff. So it felt really important to get emotion engaged first, because great action is just, action, we've seen so much action in our lives in any movies. So in order to be interested, I think we need the drama. And in everything, I think that everything starts with the characters.
And what's so great about all of these actors is that their performances feel so it's so built on subtlety. It's so built on small moments, small looks. What was it like working with this multi-ethnic cast and keeping everybody kind of on the same page?
Yeah, what I tried to remember and think of is also after speaking with Hiroyuki Sanada and discussing with him, because he was an incredible presence constantly on set. He would never getting involved if he wasn't asked to, but he was great to ask him for advice also sometimes for the Japanese actors. But what I find interesting is that they don't react like us. We are much more outgoing, extroverted, and these are people that have everything, their reaction, especially at that century, is more introverted. They don't show their feelings in public. So there was a very strong moment I felt when Mariko sees her husband, well, she thinks her husband is going to die, and he can't get on the boat, so he stays there, and they say goodbye to each other. And we did several takes, I think, with Maria there, and what I remember was that the first takes were very emotional, more like a Western actor. And I felt if I took totally wrong, she wouldn't be crying in public at that moment. So there were all these people around her, and it was a very strong, dramatic moment. So we did take after take, and then in the end, she was keeping it inside her. She was very dignified when she said goodbye to her husband. And I find that even more moving in the emotion than if she had cried straight out. So those are moments that we have to remember that they just are hiding their feelings, and they're just small looks and small expressions, so they're very different from Cosmo that way, and the other actors.
And so your job as a director then is to capture those small moments and make them communicate to the audience. And so is that where kind of like the close-ups kind of come into play?
Absolutely. And especially they were very important. These intimate close-ups were even more important for the Japanese actors because their reactions were so small. They were there in their eyes, in their tweaks. And I mean, Fuji was incredible at it. But if you shoot them wide, you don't feel it. You wouldn't have felt it. Obviously, if you were in the theater and had like a wide and you can't cut close, they would have to act differently. But here, what was great is that when they were supposed to react, it was really important to come in close, I think, to get a feeling for it. And it's not only coming in close, it's about staying long enough in editing so you have time to feel something for them. So you couldn't be too cutty or go too fast. You had to actually film what wasn't said. So it was very important. Sometimes you got shows that just based on dialogue and then you just cut to whoever's talking. And here it was really important to cut to whoever wasn't talking, to reactions, silent reactions. And there were small things, even the first scene in the pigeon house between Yabushige and Toronaga, when they talk, there were a lot of small things going on there.
Well, and then contrast that with this huge boat sequence in this episode, which Justin Marks has said was the hardest thing. From his perspective, it was the hardest thing to film. Was it hard from your perspective, or was it? I spoke to Nestor Carbonell, who called it just a joy to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they don't realize everything that was around it, but no, it was really fun to do, and it was great that that Nestor and Cosmo could stand there and scream insults at each other from ship to ship. But at the same time, the conditions that night, we shot it for a few nights, that whole scene. I mean, there were two ships. There was not even full ships. There were pieces of ships on the parking lots in pouring rain that never stopped. So just for me to go from my monitor up to the actors to talk, I was like soaking wet by the time I arrived there. And they had to be constantly covered. So we were trying to get some wind and everything, but it was very hard to get the wind in there because then you'd see the rain. And it was a time in Vancouver where there was a huge storm and everything was flooded and people couldn't even leave Vancouver. I think they had closed off Vancouver. I remember our gaffer was being flown in by helicopter some days because he couldn't get out of his house. So the hard thing was really the elements around us. And at the same time, I think the elements give something real. You forget about the performance. You just have to fight the elements. And that was probably good for everyone. But it was a tough one because you have to imagine what it was going to be like. So you have blue screens, you don't have any water, you have pouring rain, and you cover the actors, and then you just tell them to, then you don't have much time because you never had enough time anyway to do anything. But I prepared for a long time in the office. I had two miniature boats, two miniature ships. And with my DOP that I brought over from Sweden, actually, I had a Swedish DP. He and I prepared all the shots that way. We sort of put two miniature ships next to each other, and we storyboarded everything in advance. So we knew what we wanted.
Are you big? I always love asking directors this. Are you really big into storyboarding? Is that something you do often?
It all depends. I love also what comes out spontaneously. But I always feel like the more you prepare, the more you can improvise afterwards. So if you have prepared everything, then as long as you don't stick to it 100%, then you know that if you come up with something better, if somebody has an incredible suggestion, or if an actor wants to do something different, you have to be open to it and go with it, because otherwise you limit yourself. But I think storyboards sometimes, when it comes to huge VFX and huge CGI and this kind of situation where we actually don't have all the shots, because all the very wide shots had to be created afterwards, and the water and everything, then it's really important, because in the storyboard, I don't only put the shots I'm going to do, I also put the shots that I'm not going to do. So I know what's coming after. So what they're going to do in the end in CGI. So that's also very important. So I must say it all depends. Storyboards are a tool like everything else, but you can't stick to it religiously.
Yeah, I read one critic called this episode very much like a full-length feature film, and it got me thinking about the split between television and film. That line really has blurred, I think, in the last several years, where you have these motion picture level episodes that you can imagine seeing on a big screen and not just on your television. Is there a difference in directing for film and directing for television, or is it all just basically the same monster?
I think it's the same monster. For me, in my head, I don't think I'm doing a feature here or I'm doing a TV. I've done both. I just think that I'm just trying to do a movie, a film, and tell the story the best I can. Obviously, in television, you have to remember one thing is that people, when they go into the theater, you actually have paid for your seats. You're not going to leave right away. You actually going to be a little bit more patient in the beginning. So you have a little bit more time to set it up. And then you can probably shoot it a bit darker because you are in a dark room. While people are watching TV at home, they have to be gripped right away, because it's very easy to just flip channel and to go over to another platform, another network, something else. And then also, you don't turn the lights off in your whole house when you watch a TV movie necessarily. I do sometimes. Some shows you have to, but most of the time, you actually like to be able to see things going on around you. So you have to, maybe lighting is slightly different, but not much anymore. But otherwise, except for time, I think that time is a luxury. And even whatever big show you do in TV, there is much more of a time limitation than in feature, because people decide that, you do most of the time there are like an hour and 15 minutes. And you don't have you have like 15 days, 20 days. You don't have like features where you can have months and months and go on for. But otherwise the result, I think, is the same. I feel you're making a movie.
And you've certainly had the opportunity to do some very big things, not just with Shogun, but with the Lord of the Rings series. And so I'm curious, with these types of big projects, do you ever desire to do something very small also after you've done something huge?
Yeah, I actually do. Actually, before I did Rings of Power first season, Lord of the Rings, in New Zealand, I did a small show for Netflix. I did a pilot for Netflix in Sweden called The Unlikely Murderer. And it was a small show. We had probably $1 million per episode. It was a Swedish crew. Swedish crew compared to America or Europe, even the rest of Europe, you 25 people on set, 30 at the most, and everybody has several functions. While if you're shooting, obviously, Lord of the Rings or Shogun, you have hundreds of people on set. And they're all very specific. They all have a very specific function. So yeah, it's really fun to do something very small, because you can actually move around the camera very quickly. You don't need to move 50 trucks around you when you turn around, and you don't need to wait. But at the same time, I feel, my job is the same. I'm in front of a monitor, and then I go over to the actors, and I argue with the DP, and we talk about time and how we're going to look and how we're going to have time to shoot this. And it feels like you adapt, but it's directing is always the same in a way, big or small. You just have to have more. You just have more toys and tools, and maybe more time also, and much bigger scope, obviously, on these big shows. And it's very exciting to have it. And the small ones are really interesting because, again, as I said, I love character, so you go more into the character. and you have time to think about it. But so yeah, so I go back. I try to go back and forth as much as I can.
Well, Charlotte, it was really great to talk to you. Congratulations. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders in the coming week. Charlotte Brändström, a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk about this.